Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this morning for our webinar, Crisis Management and Emergency Communication. We have a lot of content to get over today, so I'm going to just do a couple housekeeping items and then toss it over to Rick. If you are familiar with our safety and risk control programs or are involved in any associations here in the Wisconsin area for construction, you've definitely seen Rick's face before. He's going to be going over a lot of comprehensive high-level information in terms of what to do in terms of an emergency. So if you have any questions during this webinar, you can pop them into either the chat or the question and answer feature on Zoom, and we can either answer them right away, or you can wait until the end and we'll have a formal Q&A session as well. And just an FYI for everyone on this call that this webinar is being recorded, which means that if you need to pop off or come back, you're going to get a copy of the recording sent to you via email, and it will also include a copy of the presentation slides as well. So with those things in mind, I'll give a brief overview of Rick Barton, who is the manager of Risk Control Services and an owner here at Hausman Group. Rick has over 2 decades of insurance and safety and risk control experience working with clients in many industries, including construction, mining, trucking, manufacturing, and hospitality. He specializes in assessing risk for the clients of Hausman Group to reduce their loss potential. Through safety assessments and loss analysis, Rick develops solutions which include safety management techniques, training, and engineering. Additionally, he has been asked to speak at local and national safety conferences on topics such as how to manage a job site, as well as what it takes to be a safety leader. We're thrilled and very grateful that Rick has taken some time out of his busy schedule to chat with us today about this important topic. Welcome, Rick.
Well, thank you, Cassie. Appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for the webinar this morning. Hopefully, everyone is back in the saddle after a 3-day weekend. I know it feels like a Wednesday, but it's actually Thursday. That's a great thing, isn't it? Gotta love that. Only one more day, and we get to get back in the fun zone or something like that. So, uh, anyways, we need to get into the topic fairly quickly. As Cassie said, we have quite a bit of information to cover. It's more of a high level presentation. However, as I like to communicate to everyone, if you have specific issues that you need addressed or want another opinion on, that's what our staff is here for, myself or Ken Alderton. We will be more than happy to help you through this process. You already heard my background. I have been involved in crisis management, emergency planning from a manufacturing side, also from the construction end of things, and also in the hospitality world. So they are unique. They are different. I will admit that. However, there's a lot of commonalities, and we're going to kind of walk through it. So I've set this program up so we talk a little bit may occur at your workplace and or your job site, and to get you to think about how are we prepared to deal with these crises. We often think we are ready to deal with these crises. However, when it actually happens and the rubber hits the road, we don't always react the way we thought we might. And so we'll talk a little bit about what you can do to solve that issue as we go through the process. So again, thank you everyone for joining us on this beautiful day. I think I'd rather be out on the golf course, but as you can probably attest, crisis management and emergency communications are very, very important topics. So I think everyone has a pretty good idea what a crisis is, right? It's when something doesn't go the way we planned it. Some people might have an idea of a crisis as being I got a shop of 18 people and 7 of them called in sick. That's a crisis. Okay, I understand that is a crisis in how you run your business, but we look at crisis as more as things that are either man-made or natural happenings, and or things that can be developed in your business that affect the people that are actually at your shop, your facility, at your property, whether it's a customer and or an employee. So it could be a medical emergency. I'm going to talk specifically about a couple of them that I think sometimes we forget about, and I think we do a pretty good job on the construction side for some of these, maybe not so much on the manufacturing side. but any medical emergency is something we have to think about, whether it's a small injury or a large injury. You've got the natural disasters or the fires. I guess they're not always natural. They're usually man-made. Usually a system fails and we've got a fire, right? We might have a man-made disaster like a tornado. Don't typically spend too much time on earthquakes in this session because in the Midwest, we don't have too many. However, I have a couple customers in California that we do talk about what to do in the event of an earthquake and or in other parts of the country. So don't forget about violence in the workplace. And then last but not least, I think probably the one we often forget about. And I think when we think about risk control, we don't always think about cyber attacks, phishing attacks, things like that that happen in our businesses that can really paralyze our businesses if we're not prepared. And it takes a unique skill set to deal with those cyber attacks and those phishing attacks. But as employees, employers, we have a lot of things that we can do to help our IT people through these just by being cognizant. So we'll talk a little bit about what those are and how we deal with those crises. So bear with me for the first 15 minutes or so talking about those, but more importantly, I'm also using this as a time for you to think within your own operation on what you might be able to improve on, right? I would assume everyone's on this webinar because they want to improve what they already have. Some of us might be starting from scratch. Some of us might have a very sophisticated system. And so my goal is to, what is a safety plan? Why is it important? And the safety plan is a large plan. The emergency response or crisis management and emergency communication is really is part of that whole safety plan. And it's kind of a subset of there. Also, how do we proceed in an emergency situation? We often find that we don't proceed as the plan has told us because we weren't aware of what to do or we panic. I'll give you a good case in point, everyone. I'm in the safety world, right? And you would think that I'd be in charge or Ken would be in charge of our emergency plan. Well, we're not because we're on the road a lot and we don't have the ability to be here all the time when the emergencies happen. But many times we're here when we do a practice, like a couple times a year, we'll practice an evacuation. And I, a few years back, was in our office and we practiced one. And I went out thinking I knew where to go. I went to the wrong group, and it was a learning process for everyone. So I went to the wrong group. They had the wrong ledger, didn't have me on that ledger. I was supposed to go to the other group. So the accountability of all the people could be done properly. Well, I learned because I broke down one of the efficiencies, but that's why we practice. So, and then what are the pitfalls for you, your coworkers, and employers? As employers, what are those pitfalls that we need to worry about? I think that's also very important. So, I think we're gonna learn about that as we go through this whole process. How to communicate. I think that's the part that I hope most of the people on here have some responsibility on how and who communicates to employees, employers, emergency response personnel, the media, lawyers that maybe get involved on your side and on the other side. When I say the other side, maybe a plaintiff or somebody like that might have an issue with your system. So that's what we want to talk about. And I've added a few commentaries on that in the PowerPoint slides so you can think about those as we go through this. So one other thing I wanted to mention before I go any further, I might lose my voice. I hope it manages, but caught a little cold a week and a half ago. And it just doesn't want to dissipate. So hopefully I'll make it through this, but I think we're in pretty good shape. So everyone, what do you do for employee injuries? Well, obviously, I tell this to everyone, you take care of the injured employee first. As long as the area is secure and we're not going to have additional injuries, take care of that and administer first aid or care for that person. Do the right thing. Keep the victim and yourself calm and relaxed. It's hard to do that. Some of us are trained in first aid, CPR, AED use, all that stuff. But when it happens and we're not trained medical professionals, we can lose our cool. I'm not asking anyone to go out and change their personalities or anything, but take some deep breaths, relax. I mentioned we have to protect yourself. Don't go into a situation that's unsafe. Confined space is a great example. Many times we want to retrieve someone that went down, and we go in there, we become one of those victims, and that can be an issue. We might have a trench collapse. We want to go in there and pull someone out of that trench and help them or dig them out, and then it caves in. Now we've got two people equipment in a manufacturing facility, and we got to move those. We got to move them safely. So protect yourself. And then you can start your incident and reporting and investigation. And I don't like to call it investigation. I always think we're trying to point blame out when we investigate. I like to call it analysis because then we're trying to find root causes. So keep that in mind. But very, very, very important. Once you do get that person taken care of, do you have someone that can take them to medical services, or are we going to call an ambulance? Do you know where the nearest urgent care or emergency room is? I think for our fixed facilities, we have a pretty good idea, but sometimes we do work off-site. Sometimes as contractors, we do work in an area we may not be as familiar with. One of the planning techniques we need to do is identify where that service is and how far away is it? How do we get there? And then obviously calling 911. And these aren't necessarily in order, but they're things for you to think about. Are these things we go over with our teams, our teammates, and our colleagues when we're out there? And 911 doesn't work everywhere. I was in a facility a few weeks back, and I noticed my cell phone had no service. It said SOS on it, which means I don't have any service because there were concrete walls. I was in the middle of the plant. There was no Wi-Fi extenders in the area where I was because it was a warehousing area. Maybe the computers on the forklifts might work there, but mine wasn't. So think about that as you deal with that. So have a response plan. Who are your key players? Do you have trained first aiders? Do you have someone that's going to be uh, a responder, or in any case, maybe someone that's going to help get people out of the building into the proper tornado shelters, wherever that might be? Who are those key players? And have they volunteered, or are you just naming them? Make sure they want to do what you're asking them to do because they need to be trained on how to do that. Who's in command? Who's second in command? There should always be you might call it a chief commander. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, a lead commander. But then there should be the administrators, the ones that get people out of the building and things like that. So who are those people? Maybe you name them by position, maybe not by names, so that plan can live as we move people around in our facilities. But one thing I want to remind everyone is as people move into these positions that are going to be in charge of your emergency plan, make sure they get some training or some education on what their responsibilities are. And then do you have a process on a plan on how to proceed from the time the emergency starts? I got the tornado warnings went off. We just had this a few weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago today. Maybe it was where we had all those tornadoes ripping through Wisconsin. Do we have a plan? How do we proceed? Where do we go? Who's in charge? Things like that. So those are things to think about. I think a couple of weeks ago we probably got some good practice. As I heard tornado sirens going off, people were starting to evacuate, or not evacuate, but go into their lower levels if they had them, or go to their internal safe zones and things like that. Make sure you can do that. I had a customer that had a small operation in a pretty high prone tornado area. They had about 16 to 17 people that worked there. They had a tornado area inside their building, but it could really only hold 10 people. What do we do? We need to think about that. So how do you proceed? If you do have something that goes wrong, you might want to take some pictures. So that's a call on your part. I think we got to deal with the emergency. We'll worry about pictures left. I talked about 911 a little earlier. Just want to make a couple comments on that. Again, make sure that you do have service. Make sure you have a physical address and you know where that is. And I bring this up because I know we always get some contractors on here. Those locations don't always have physical addresses, but sometimes we might be in a location that we might have a physical address, but the physical address takes us to a different location. So verify that that physical address and the GPS is going to get us to the right location. Make sure that the entrances to those locations aren't blocked. Make sure that the location is accessible by the emergency professionals. We run into this many times, especially on job sites where they don't know how to get in, especially on road jobs. Have access points, numbers, ID'd, things like that. Is your location in a building accessible? I already talked about that. And like I mentioned earlier, do you get a cell phone signal? Is it strong enough to make a call? One bar might not get you a call. You might have a signal, but it might not be strong enough. So verify that stuff prior to the emergency happening if you can. We often forget about that, don't we? We are only on a site, or maybe we're only going to this warehouse a couple times a week to get some product out of there, so we don't have someone there full time. So we don't think about that person. And is that person doing some solitary work? Are we keeping an eye on them? Things like that. These are all, planning situations. What do we do if we know the guy's going over to our facility and he's going to be by himself? After an hour, do we try to call him, see if he's okay? We all got to come up with a plan, and not every plan is going to be the same. So that's why everyone on this call, you're going to probably have some unique plans, and we can talk about those offline, but they are going to be unique to your facilities and how you do work. So we often talk about emergency preparedness and the essential elements. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. It's a slide you can take and figure out if you've identified all your hazards. I think we often forget about that cyber hazard. We often forget about loss of utilities and no backup generator. Do we have something that needs assistance? And then assess your capabilities and what resources do you have internally and externally. Some of us might not be in the position where we're going to have a lot of internal resources, so we're going to rely on our external local communities. And then we have some communities that really don't have the services we need, and that might be for maybe a rescue plan and stuff like that. And I'll talk about that in a second. So again, please think about your emergency preparedness plan and be honest to yourself and say, are these covered? Could this happen at our facility? And if it could, is it something that could be serious? If it could be serious, then maybe we need to think about adding it to our emergency plan and dealing with it. If I had you all raise your hands on how many people have conducted any training, for those of you with fixed facilities on evacuations or tornado sheltering in place, I'm curious how many of you have. Did I see a question come in? Cassie, can you provide the questions?
We have not had someone put a question in.
Okay, I just saw raising the hand saying, yeah, we probably have had that happening. I got it. I always forget how the system works when I don't do webinars every day on Zoom, but it does work fairly well. That's why we use it. So, but really good. We do have to think about these issues. And again, my goal in this webinar isn't to make you, all your plans perfect. It's for you to think about, does my plan meet those bare essentials? And when I actually have to use it, is it going to help my employees and my business get back to where it needs to be? And I think that last part, that business getting back to where it needs to be, you guys might think, well, we're worried about the personnel. Yeah, we're always worried about personnel first, but we do need to think about getting that business up and back in order, because many times when businesses have an emergency and it's a significant disaster, if it's a small business, sometimes they struggle to get back online and profitable again. So keep that in mind. So think about these last 4 things: conduct training. Do you have someone in charge of public relations? And that's going to be the end of the presentation, where I talk about communication, and then conducting drills and exercising, and then making changes to that plan. I once was working with a fairly large manufacturing facility that had a very, very, very significant fire. Fortunately, they were large enough to be able to handle that fire and continue their business. But when I spoke with them the day after that and went and visited the site, I asked them how the evacuation went, and they got they were pleasantly disappointed, I guess is probably the way I like to put it. It got everyone out. They accounted for everyone, but it took them almost 9 minutes to account for everyone. A very, very large facility, over 1 million square feet. And they thought that their plan could account for everyone in 3 to 5 minutes. So they worked on it and they eventually got it down to that point. Now, they haven't had another emergency to practice a true uh, emergency, but when they practice, they're able to do it. But they learn from it. So always learn from what you're doing. So real briefly, in case of a fire, know where to go, know where to get out. If you're going to have people fight fires, make sure they know how to use the fire extinguishers. Just an FYI, if you are letting your employees know, that's an annual training requirement by OSHA, but it also makes really good sense. So keep that in mind. Know how to call 911 or when to call 911. Only fight incipient stage fires. Most of us probably don't have fire brigades. There's only a few left in the state of Wisconsin, and typically they're in very large manufacturing facilities. So we probably don't have any here. Know how to get out, where your egress is. And this goes for not only jobs or fixed sites, but even job sites. Know where those exits are. Have an idea where the exits are so that people, if something does happen, they know where they need to go and how they can get accounted for. Account for your people as they come in during the day, know who's at work, mark all your exits and stuff like that. I want everyone to also think about this. I know not everyone on this call probably has fall protection issues and confined space issues, and I understand that. But I still, to this day, run into issues where we don't plan for that rescue, right? And we might not have that service available within our organization. So we're relying on the local services. And I will tell you this, if you're relying on your fire department or a third party, you need to have a plan in place so that you let them know when you're going to be in a confined space. If you're in construction trades, it's required that you notify someone that you're going into your space if you're relying on them for rescue. And then if they are busy or they get called upon, they will let you know and you have to evacuate. Fall is not the same, but many times we can have a fall rescue plan on site, and get people down, but we have to have the right equipment and we've got to have the right people to be able to do that. So just check with your local communities. If you're in a smaller community, a lot of us are in the more metropolitan areas, I understand it, but we also have a lot of customers that have facilities or do work in small communities that don't have these services available. So have an alternative plan. Don't forget about inclement weather, tornadoes, flooding, blizzards, freezing temperatures. Again, I'm not going to go through each of these step by step, only for time purposes. But I do want you to realize that even freezing temperatures can put your business in jeopardy of running as a pipe breaks and now you've got a flood in your facility and you didn't have a water flow meter on there, and all of a sudden, boom, we walk in on a day and a lot of our products underwater or damaged because of that broken pipe, and maybe the heat turned off, whatever it is, a lot of different things. Most of you probably know if you're in a flood zone, but hey, as we found out over the years, right, especially in Madison back a few years ago, we had some areas that we probably didn't think were flood zones. And, when you get that much rain in a short period of time, a non-flood zone, that 100-year flood zone becomes a flood zone, and it becomes a pretty nasty issue. So think about those. Again, I'll say this several times as we go through this. My goal this morning is just to get you to think about these things and then sit down with your plan, go over it, and determine whether or not we have those. I don't know if everyone realizes this, but in 2024, there's going to be well over $200 billion paid from weather-related disasters. And I didn't even bring in forest fires, did I? We could have those, and we have those in the state of Wisconsin, the Midwest. I just didn't bring those in the last slide. I brought in fires, but I didn't bring in forest fires, right? But you can see how the dollar value is escalated. The cost of repairs are more, the cost to pay people to repair are more, but it's just more and more. And we are having more natural disasters, more hurricanes, more tornadoes, more lightning strikes, more flooding, things like that, because we are having these ups and downs in our weather patterns. So be aware of that. So for those of you that are on a financial end, make sure you have the proper coverages in place so you do have coverage for this. I'm not an agent that sells you guys the insurance, but if you don't have flood coverage and you have a flood, you're probably not going to have a lot of a lot of legs to stand on. So think about that. Make sure you get the right coverages. Make sure they're going to adequately insure your property so that you guys can get up and running. And that's really important. So we'll talk a little bit about. And then one of the fastest growing business interruption events, not even tied to weather. I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to spend a couple minutes on this only because I think it's so important, is cyber security, right? There's not a person on this call, I bet, that doesn't have an electronic device that relies on the internet. And because of that, we are vulnerable to cyber attacks. Whether it's a phishing attack or whatever it is, we are vulnerable. And I got this source last year. The numbers really didn't change, so we didn't update this, but the FBI reports about a 243% jump in ransomware attacks in that short period of time. And they're only going up since then. So just think about it. It's probably up 400% by now, being 2025. 21% of all cyber attacks occur and are taking place throughout the country. Cost over $20 billion in 2023. That number's probably last year was probably more than $22 billion. Think about that. That's an astonishing amount. And the issue is it doesn't just affect, you hear about the big, targets and all that get, phished and have a cyber attack, but it's those small companies that really 85% of the businesses that are attacked are small companies, less than 250 employees. And I bet you a lot of us on this And so we've got to think about what we need to do. 60% of small businesses that fall victim to a cyber attack close permanently. That's a startling fact. And I'm sure everyone on this call has probably heard some of these stats, but sometimes we have to hear it again to remember it, right? And remind ourselves that, hey, if we're under 250 employees and we have a cyber attack, we better have some good controls in place. Otherwise, our business might be vulnerable, right? If our customers aren't getting their product, or our customers aren't able to send us the funds that they owe us because we've been attacked and we can't pay our employees, the employees aren't going to sit around for 6 months and wait for a paycheck. They gotta put food on their table and they've got to pay their bills. They're going to walk and find someone that can. So this stuff really affects us. And so often it's just because that one employee or is someone decided, hey, that looked pretty interesting. I think I'm going to click on that. I might get a free TV. All right. And boom, all of a sudden they're in our system and it's blowing up. So, how do we protect this? Well, it's not easy, but it's something that we have to be vigilant about. And I've just put together 10 steps to reduce your cyber risk. And again, there's more. These are basic ones. Train your employees. We have to go through it here at Hausman Group. I don't know how many times a year I have to go through a cyber training class. They're virtual, but you know what? I always get frustrated I have to do this, but every time I go through it, I always think about what I just went through. And yeah, it's good that they reminded me not to click on that or not to do this or not to go to that website or stuff like that. And it's just little things that I don't think about in my everyday work life. Install, use, and regularly update antivirus and anti-spyware software. Use a firewall. I bet you all of us are doing most of the top things here. Like make backup copies, download and install proper software. Don't just let employees drop any software onto your system. Make sure it is evaluated by your IT person, or you have some validation that is good software. Control physical access to your computers and networks. In other words, don't let your computers lay open as the cleaning people are coming through your facility, or they're sitting on a job site in a truck, right? Somebody decides to grab it and the foreman doesn't know it's been grabbed. Pretty soon someone's hacked into it and there it goes. And that goes for our phones too, because there's a lot of data on our phones we can get into, right? Secure your Wi-Fi networks. Require individual user accounts for each employee. Limit employee access to data and information if you can. Some of us need more information than others. Some of us don't need as much information to do our jobs effectively. And then don't forget to change your passwords. Don't you hate that? You've been using this password, you finally got it memorized, and all of a sudden you got to change it. Every one of us gets frustrated by that, I bet. But you know what? When you think about why we're doing it, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's to preserve the integrity of our business. It's to preserve our workplace and keep you guys going. So think about that. Hopefully that kind of makes you think about that. If you're not an IT person on the call, which most of us probably aren't, just go over these things. Are we doing this? And I bet you most of you are doing most of these things. But if there's one thing we can do better, that's how we improve our emergency process, right? You can go to this planner that the government put out. It's a cyber planner. I'm not going to go through it. Just thought I'd put it in the presentation so you guys get it and stuff like that. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about before I get into communication is active shooters. As we know, this isn't going away. We know this is going to be around. I'm not going to play the video here, but active shooters we hear about them every week, right? It seems like somewhere in the country we hear about them. Madison, we got hit last fall. It happens all the time. Was that fall? I forget when that was. But it was recently. You don't know who it's going to be, where it's going to come from, and how it's going to work. They just happen all the time. And I'm not going to isolate any of the situations that have happened. That's not my goal here. But I do want you to prepare. So the only way we prepare is we make it part of our emergency plan. We educate people on things to look at, what to do. A couple of things that we think about often, if we know someone that might be using drugs, that could be an issue. If somebody starts looking a little different than what they usually do, that tells me that maybe their psychosomatics aren't quite right, and they might be prone to this. And again, they might just be doing something else, but something to keep an eye on. Disciplinary action, terminations result in people coming back and getting frustrated with their workplaces and deciding to take it out on them. Aggressive behaviors at work, someone that's really vulgar, maybe aggressive to people. If they have a divorce, they lose their house, things like that. There's just a lot of things to keep in mind. Again, 99.9% of people these are not going to affect them and turn them into active shooters, right? But we still need to keep a vigilant evaluation of this. So, and so you can see these things again, just things to think about. But are we training our workers on this, on how to anticipate these? And if you have an issue, bring it to HR, let them deal with it. These are the things I saw. These are the things I'm thinking about. How can I help this? Because when it does happen to us, we've got to react. And when we react and something does happen, everyone's probably heard this run, hide, and fight. It's been out there for quite a long time. And it's true. The first thing you want to do is get out of there. Plan a path. If you've got an office and you know there's two ways to get out of the building, and if you know which ways to go, get out, run, hide behind the partitions, whatever they are in your office area. Your choice. It's your life or your choice, but get out of there. Duck and dodge. Be ready for police orders. If they're going to tell you to sit, they're going to tell you to get out of here. These are things we need to think about. So, if you can't get out, then you got to hide, be quiet, turn your phone off. Your phone goes off because someone's trying to find you, and all of a sudden the active shooter knows where that's coming from, right? And we could go on forever on this. We could spend hours on this, right? But I just trying to give you guys a quick idea on what to do, because I do want to get in the communication section real quick here. And then when the police arrive, please pay attention to what's going on, remain calm, and so forth. So with that, let's talk about communication. I apologize for going over on that a little bit, but I think it's important that we just refresh our minds. And I'm probably like everyone on this call. Even when I give a webinar and I'm preparing for it, I think about these things, and I think about the customers I'm working with, and it helps me better identify the crises that we have to deal with. So we got to think about that. I'm going to skip this video. If anyone was on the call last year, I used it, but this is a fire in Houston. It's a apartment building that started on fire. It was about a $50 million loss. But there's an employee that gets out on the work ledge right here. and the fire ensues and he can't get out. Finally, the ladder truck rescues him. My gut feeling tells me they didn't prepare very well for an emergency because this guy got stuck in an area where he couldn't get out. And thank God he lived, but there's also that potential for tragedy. So always think about what type of crises you can have. Go back to those first few slides. Think about those crises. There he is. And he gets stuck up there. And it does happen. They get him off. But for time's sake, I'm going to move on. Sorry about that, everyone. If you want that video, it's a really cool video. It happened in Houston and probably about 9-10 years ago. Pretty sad case. Thank God no one got hurt. But you know when a crisis starts? When something goes wrong. We all know that, right? We never plan on it. That's why I call it a crisis. All of a sudden, it happens. All of a sudden, someone tells us there's a storm coming. We look out the window, and sure enough, the tornado warnings are going off, or there's a fire that starts, or for God's sake, somebody falls in, off of a ledge or a piece of equipment and they get hurt, right? We can prepare for a lot of these before an incident occurs, but many times the only way we prepare is by practicing. And I'll stress that. So you'll need a crisis management plan. You guys might call it an emergency management plan. I like to call it crisis management plan. Because if you look at the bottom bullet point, there's 3 parts to every crisis management plan. There's the plan. What do we do when it happens? There's the communication part, which I'm going to speak about next. And that's very, very important. We can make or break a business. And then what do we do to get back up and running? Business continuity. Do you have partnerships with other businesses that can help us in the event that we go down? Maybe we have a share plan. When they go down, we help them. We go down, they help us. But communication is key. And this is to your employees, to contractors, to management, emergency response personnel, and media. And I will tell you that the media can blow up your emergency response plan to make it look like you're not prepared, and then you got egg on your face, and your business doesn't have a good showing in the community, right? And that's what we want to get through is communicating the right stuff, not the stuff that we shouldn't be. And that's what I want to spend the next 10 minutes on, is just the communication process, because I think it's so key. It's not rocket science, but I bet if we have 100 people on a call, there's probably only a handful of people that are probably the right person to be that communicator. And maybe I'm underestimating that, but not all of us are going to be good communicators to the outside personnel. So we might have to designate that person. But a good plan is going to minimize our delays in getting back into work. And it's going to protect you and your customers. Why do I say your customers? Because if we're down less time, we're going to get our product out to people. We're going to have our facilities available for people to use if we're in a hospitality world, or if we're a contractor, we're going to get that job done a little quicker, right? You think about some of the mega disasters that have happened, like, it was called Miller Park back then, but when damage, but we were able to salvage what we had and get things back up online. So our goal is to get you guys back up online. And so that's why we need to develop a plan. Identify your vulnerable areas. You might have a great plan for fire, but maybe our vulnerable area is our tornadoes. Maybe we have a great plan for fire, but we don't have a good plan if our utilities get shut off because our backup generator only runs part of our plant. Rank those risks. Which ones do we need to work on? Develop an action plan for the top 2 or 3. You might have some risks. You might identify 9 risks, and you might say, hey, we got 6 of these under control, but those other 3 we got to work on. Then what we want to do is practice. That's that table. You can either do a tabletop with the critical people. I've done that. I was a member of a team that did a practice up at Lambeau Field. We did several tabletops. I was the acting safety consultant for the Green Bay Packers, so they had me in with the FBI and all kind. And we did an active shooter type thing right before a game. Very, very interesting. We learned so much from doing that tabletop. None of us had to go out into the facility or anything like that. All we did was we sat in a large conference room. We had a scenario placed on the board, and everything was laid out for us, and we all reacted in the way we were supposed to. We went around a room and talked about it. We found out we had some issues. So that was great. We learned a lot and then review it. So I would hope that we're doing that with our critical issues and stuff like that. If you do have a crisis management plan, you should have a communication tree. This is more, you guys will see this if you blow this up when you get the PowerPoint. You can read it a little better, but really what it does is it just kind of gives you a line of communication all the way from site personnel to management to outside or inside PR people that are going to be your spokespersonnel. And it helps because it defines what those individuals are going to do. If someone shows up from the fire department, there might be a management personnel that's going to address the fire department on what's going on, where the hazard is. If it's outside of that, maybe a half hour later, you finally get News 4 showing up. We might have a PR person dealing with that person. And I'll go through that in a second. But it's really important to have these personnel identified ahead of time. Again, 99% of having a positive outcome is pre-planning. If we don't plan, that's when we have negative outcomes because we didn't think about what could happen. And I'm not saying that you're still going to have a bad outcome, but when I look at bad outcomes, they're usually because we didn't have a plan in place. So when you have to respond, protect people first. We mentioned that earlier, property second, but start gathering facts. And I should have that highlighted and bolded and an exclamation point, gather facts. If someone gives you some information and they weren't part of the actual crisis, that's probably not a fact. It's probably secondhand. It's probably been exaggerated. It's probably been blown up. So think about that. Gather the facts, activate that crisis management team. You might have, if you got a facility of 100 people or a job site of 100 people, you might only have 3 or 4 people that are part of that crisis management team. Those are the people that are going to be the keynote people. It might not be your CEO, it might not be your president. It might just be somebody that has good knowledge of what you're doing and how you're doing it. Make sure within your plan you have a social media plan. Employees are not supposed to put anything on social media about what happens at the company in terms of a disaster or an emergency. Make sure they understand that could be reasons for disciplinary action. And don't forget, every time there's a crisis, it makes the news. You might say, well, not every crisis. That's probably true, but most of them make the news because news is always about the negative things that happen in our community. And we want to turn this into a positive. So make sure that you have someone ready to talk to the media when they show up. And again, I said gather the facts, never speculate on anything that ever happens. Well, we think it was a $50 million loss. That's speculation. We don't know that. In fact, I wouldn't give that out anyways. But we don't want to talk about that. We want to, because if you speculate, you're starting to give out information that's not factual, which then affects your integrity. Because if we find out that what you provided in the beginning of the crisis is not actually what happened, they're going to start questioning the validity of that company and that organization. So perform acts of goodwill. Don't be afraid to, go out. Back a few years ago, they took everyone over to a holding area. It was great. They got fed, they got food, things like that. They weren't really performing acts of goodwill. They were really just accounting for personnel, but they tried to comfort them. For those of you that are going to be media contacts, make sure you give them information, but only factual information. Never speculate, and make sure you're the ones that report your bad news. Make sure it's not the guy in the corner that starts telling them about how the fire happened inside your building or about what's going on inside your building. Make sure it's coming from a company official. That's really important. It doesn't hurt to have a list of all the things that could go wrong in a different crisis. So if you have an active shooter, this is a list of things we need to cover. If we have a fire, these are the things we need to cover. Doesn't hurt to do that. Put the public interest ahead of your organization because the public's going to turn your organization upside down just through through goodwill, stuff like that. And I say this, and you'll hear this several times, quickly communicate as fast and as quickly as we can but only if it's accurate. And don't be afraid to tell the media or anyone that you don't have that information right now, but do give them an answer on when we will. So I'll give you an example. I think it's coming up later. You get a call. It's an ongoing crisis or it's an ongoing issue, and you get a call from a news outlet, and they ask you for information. Take down their name, take down their news information, and you don't have any information for them, but you said you'll follow up. Make sure you follow up with them. You might not have good information for them, but if it's factual, you can provide that to them. Whenever you're in charge of communication, you're always trying to bring that situation under control. We don't know when that's going to be, but once we get it under control, we can start gathering more information. Don't blow the situation out of proportion. Don't say, "Oh, I think there's still 14 people left in the building. We can't account for." That's, if you don't know, don't provide it to them. Only provide the facts. And a really important thing is always notify the family before the news does or someone else. I had a death of an employee many years ago, and I'll never forget this. The president and CEO of that company was to the doorstep of that widow way before anyone could even get there, because he wanted to make sure that he let that widow know that her husband had passed away. It was the hardest thing he ever did in his life, but you know what? That goodwill went a long ways. I call that goodwill, because he went there with the intent to let him know that he's sorry his company failed in protecting her husband, and they're going to do a better job. I don't know all what he said. I wasn't there, but when I heard about it, it sent a lot of goodwill into the community. Keep internal employees and families informed. That's why when I say communicating to contractors, employees, employers, we got to keep people informed, and then make sure that who's ever communicating with the media knows how to do that. They might even have to go out and get some training. Many times it's not the head of the company. It's someone that's a little less emotional. It could be a third party. You can go out and hire a PR firm whenever you have this. Some companies do. It's recommended in some cases and not all. But don't communicate things like this. Never communicate money estimates. I just said $50 million, right? That's why I said I wouldn't communicate that. Don't say that. Don't say anything about insurance coverage. Get your agent involved. Make sure they're aware. In fact, you always want to call your agent when there's an emergency. We can make sure that there is going to be, we can check on coverage, make sure the carrier is involved. That's really important. Speculation, never speculate. Don't ever blame. This is not a blame game. It's a matter of finding the facts out, and never, ever say anything off the record. There's no such thing. It just blows my mind when people say that. Do not use no comment. Very, very bad thing to use. Use other statements. As I said, I've given you one. We are reviewing the incident and we'll get information as soon as we have something, period. You don't have to give them anything more than that. But then when you get something, make sure you communicate back to them. All right. Verify who you are speaking with. Some companies set up a, at 1:00, we're going to have a press conference. Okay. That's fine. That's a good thing to do. But don't give them anything that's not factual. Keep a log of all your media calls, return calls promptly. You might think these are small little things. They'll come back to haunt you if you don't do them right. Need to be honest and avoid the following: not having facts. I say you might have to get someone special, because you might have, we've got to get someone that's not going to panic. So make sure that spokesperson, is available. You might have to consult your legal counsel. And again, these are just quick things to think about. How do I learn about this? I've been through a few of these. I've never been the spokesperson because I'm usually not part of the company or I'm not part of the PR firm. 9 times out of 10, a company official or a company person is probably a good spokesperson, as long as they can hold it together. That's really important. And again, once it's over, declare an end, do your follow-up, perform your acts of goodwill. If you have a serious issue, maybe you open up a fund for helping the person out that's been hurt or injured, whatever. Debrief, that's that auditing part, debrief. How'd it go? What can we improve on? All that other good stuff. And I know I'm wrapping this thing up, so I got to be quick on this, but like I said, you got to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're going to be shooting from the hip and you're going to miss a few things. Review it annually so that we don't have to, go back and and miss things, but going to pick up on things, communicate the plan internally. It's actually an OSHA requirement that you communicate your emergency plan to everyone. So it makes good sense, and expect the unexpected and add it to your plan. You know, we run into these things all the time. We think we got everything covered, and all of a sudden, boom, we forgot that, plant three doesn't have a backup generator, and now it's down. And you know what? Guess what? We got a critical piece of equipment, and now we got some business continuity issues. And don't forget your tabletop exercises. Um, you can do them in a small group, you can do them in a larger group. Doesn't make a difference. Just try them. So, like I said earlier, or maybe I didn't say this earlier, failing to prepare is preparing to fail, especially in crisis response and communication. We don't make money from having a crisis management plan. Reserving, and that's probably just as important, right? So with that, starting to lose my voice here, I will turn it over to Cassie and any questions as I ran a couple minutes late.
We are doing just fine, actually. We've got about 9 minutes here to chat and do some questions if people would like to put any question they have in the Q&A or the chat. We are happy to talk about them. There was a comment that came through about the communications chart that you put out. Do you know what program was used to make that communications chart?
Uh, I believe it's just a Word document. The problem with it is it's kind of convoluted, so it'd probably be best if you had a designer that could put it into a design program. But we did it in Word back when we put it together. It's fairly old, but it's fairly consistent. We made a few changes to it, but not many.
Perfect. And then another question came through. What are key roles that need to be a part of creating the plan?
Well, you're going to have your plan coordinator, your administrator. That's going to be the top. Then you might have sergeants, or people have attendants, things like there's different names for them. So if you're in a fixed facility, you might have different people that are going to evacuate different areas. So those would be part of that plan. But it's really having that commander, if you want to call it that, that internal commander, and then having some sergeants underneath them, if you want to call it that. We kind of use the military verbiage sometimes to get that across, but they will work on putting that, making sure that we do the right things in the event that the emergency is in their areas and stuff like that. Um, and the rest of you might have a couple other job tasks, or people that might be there to shut down critical utilities if we need to. So you might have a maintenance person that has to shut down critical utilities. Um, those are basic. I try to keep it basic so we don't get too many titles. We want to be more concerned about making sure their roles are doing what they're supposed to do. And then the last group is typically, and you might have a few more, but or another one, but your first, your first responders, your first aiders, your people that are trained in first aid and CPR. They might not be part of that group, but they're going to be listed, and we know that we can call upon them to help with an injured employee or um, a guest or something like that. We often have to attend to guests or other people in the site.
Good answer. Our next question is there a boilerplate that we could start with to develop our emergency action plan, not wanting to recreate the wheel?
Oh, we don't want to recreate something? Come on. Yeah, we do have a couple boilerplates that we do use. Some are pretty short. They just need to be expanded on. We can send those out, or if you just send me an email, I'll be more than happy to send you a couple examples that we have used with customers over the years just to get them started. So use my email address. I'd like to send those separately. I don't want to send it out as a package. So that's not a problem at all.
Lovely. Any other questions at this time? Okay. So
All
it
right.
looks like oh, never mind. One came through.
All right. Go ahead.
It was too early. How do you address having too many evacuation procedures? Examples are active shooter, fire, tornado, so that it isn't confusing for employees in a fixed facility.
Um, that really, it's not about too many. It's about making sure they understand the difference. And I think if I'm correct, probably the question I get is, so if I have a fire, how am I going to alert people that I have a fire versus an active shooter, right? That's probably what the quite and don't I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth, but that's typically what we get. So in those cases, we might have a paging system or a communication system that defines the difference between those different emergencies. So if you've got an alarm system, it might ring 3 times for a fire. It might ring once for a tornado, whatever. If you have a paging system, you can put it out over the PA. If you aren't using those systems and you're using cell phone activation, you can put them out that way by fire or whatever it is. So it's not the easiest thing to do, but that's why we practice to make sure that those communication techniques to our employees about what the hazard is or what the emergency is does get through to them properly. And the only way you're going to know it is by practicing. That's the hard part.
All right. Got a couple comments that have come through. Just someone with a comment saying, thank you for admitting that the retraining, I'm guessing when you talked about cybersecurity, can be tedious, but that you learn something new every time. Good to
I, I,
remember.
I get frustrated every time. Nelson's our IT guy and he doesn't send it out. When I get it, I think I am, and I go, why do I have to do this? But I do learn something. Once I get on it, it's okay, and it's
Yep.
not that long, so it's great.
Important to remember. Well,
Yep.
with that, that's all of our questions and our time for today. Thank you all so much for staying here till the end and participating in our questions and answers. It looks like Rick had some sort of saturation occurrence with his webinar, so that's why he's become a bit pink and purpley, depending on your view of the color.
Oh
But
yeah.
luckily, we've still been able to hear and see most of the information. So thank you all again so much for attending. And again, if you have any questions you think of after the webinar, Rick's information will be shared with you, as well as a recording of this presentation and a copy of the presentation slides. So thank you all again for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your morning.